Some people stay long after their soul already left the room. They keep smiling, keep answering messages, keep forgiving things that no human being should forgive. And the terrifying part is not the betrayal, no. The terrifying part is how normal the pain starts to feel after a while. You adapt to disrespect. You adapt to being ignored. You adapt to carrying conversations alone like some exhausted animal dragging chains through the mud. And one day you wake up realizing you have been begging people to love you correctly. That is humiliation, not sadness. Humiliation. You know what weakens a man? Not failure, not heartbreak. It is repeating the same emotional wound until his spirit becomes numb. There are people who only value your absence when your footsteps stop echoing around them. But by then, it is too late. Because the quiet version of a broken person is dangerous. Very dangerous. Not violent, not loud, just finished. Finished explaining, finished chasing, finished trying to convince cold people to grow hearts. And the saddest thing? Some souls stay loyal to people who destroyed them. Why? Because memories can become addictions. You miss the illusion, not the person. You miss who they pretended to be in the beginning. Funny, isn't it? How humans will drown trying to save relationships that were killing them slowly. So sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is disappear quietly, even while their chest burns, even while their hands shake, even while every memory screams for them to stay. And people will call you cold for finally protecting yourself. Isn't that beautiful? They watch you bleed quietly for years, but the moment you stop bleeding for them, suddenly you become different. No, you are not different. You are exhausted. There is a type of pain that changes the structure of a human being. Not immediately, slowly, like water rotting wood from the inside. At first you try harder, you communicate more, you become softer, calmer, more patient. You keep thinking love can repair everything. Until one night, one very quiet night, you sit alone, staring at the ceiling, realizing you have been destroying yourself just to keep another person comfortable. And something inside you snaps. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently. The attachment weakens, the illusions collapse, the excuses stop sounding believable. You finally see them clearly. Not who you hoped they were, not who they pretended to be, who they truly are when your heart is no longer blinding your eyes. That realization hurts. It hurts deeply. Because now you must accept that some people enjoyed your loyalty more than they ever loved you. And that truth can make a grown man feel physically sick. But listen carefully. Do not stay where your soul feels unwanted. Do not stay where your kindness becomes a tool people use against you. Do not keep setting yourself on fire, hoping cold people will finally feel warm. You were not created to beg for basic respect. Some endings are mercy disguised as heartbreak. Some separations save your future. Even if your chest aches afterward, even if silence becomes unbearable at night, even if memories attack you when the room gets dark. Healing still begins with distance, not attachment. You know what destroys people slowly? Hope. Not healthy hope, no, the toxic kind. The kind that keeps you emotionally chained to someone who keeps proving again and again that your suffering does not disturb their sleep. And still, you stay. Because the human heart is embarrassingly loyal to familiar pain. People become addicted to patterns, even painful ones. That is why some souls keep returning to the same door, even after being crushed behind it 1,000 times. You start making excuses for behavior that should have been the final warning. They're just tired. They're going through something. They still care deep down. Deep down? Sometimes deep down there's nothing there anymore. And accepting that truth hurts like hell. Because now you must grieve someone who is still alive. You must mourn conversations that no longer feel warm, mourn effort that disappeared, mourn the version of them that only existed in the beginning. People change, or maybe they simply stop pretending. And that realization can make your stomach turn, especially when you gave them the softest parts of yourself, your patience, your attention, your forgiveness, only to realize they were slowly teaching you how little you meant to them. A wounded person can survive many things: rejection, failure, loneliness, but confusion? Confusion destroys the mind. Not knowing where you stand with someone, watching them become colder while you desperately try to save the connection, that kind of pain eats people alive quietly. You begin questioning yourself, your worth, your value, your entire identity. And one day, you finally understand something terrifying. You cannot heal in the same place that keeps breaking you. So you stop chasing, stop arguing, stop explaining wounds they clearly enjoyed causing. Because closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes closure is seeing the truth and walking away anyway, even while your heart screams for one more chance. That is strength, not attachment. And after everything, after the sleepless nights, after the anxiety, after replaying memories until your mind feels poisoned, you finally begin understanding something painful. Some people were only meant to teach you what loneliness feels like in the presence of another human being. That kind of loneliness is different. Heavier, colder, because you are not physically alone, but emotionally you are starving beside someone who watches you fade without trying to save you. And the human soul can only tolerate that for so long before something inside it dies. You stop recognizing your own laughter, your own energy. Even your silence changes. People can hear exhaustion in silence. Did you know that? They can hear when a person has cried too many nights in private. They can hear when hope is collapsing slowly inside someone's chest. But the strange thing about pain is that eventually it begins creating clarity. The attachment weakens little by little, the emotional fog disappears, and suddenly, you see how much of yourself you sacrificed just to avoid losing someone who was already emotionally gone. That realization breaks people, because now you must face the truth honestly. You were fighting alone. And love cannot survive when only one soul keeps carrying it on bleeding shoulders. You cannot force warmth from cold hearts. You cannot beg people to value what they are comfortable losing. And you cannot keep abandoning yourself, hoping somebody finally notices your suffering. That path only leads to emptiness, to emotional decay, to waking up one morning feeling like a stranger inside your own body. So eventually, you make the hardest decision of all. Not because you stopped loving them. No, that would be easier. You leave because you finally start loving yourself too. And self-respect changes people. Quietly, dangerously. It teaches you to stop romanticizing pain, stop glorifying suffering, stop mistaking emotional addiction for loyalty. Because loyalty should not require self-destruction. And sometimes, the most painful goodbye becomes the first honest act of self-respect in your entire life. People love talking about loyalty, but very few talk about the damage loyalty can do when it is given to the wrong person. Because loyalty without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And most people realize that too late. They realize it after months of anxiety, after checking their phone every 5 minutes, hoping for warmth from someone who responds like a stranger. After sitting in silence, wondering why basic affection suddenly feels like something they must earn. That is how emotional exhaustion begins. Not from one big betrayal, from small disappointments repeated every day. Little cold replies, little lies, little moments where your intuition whispers, something is wrong. But people ignore intuition when attachment becomes too strong. You start explaining away disrespect because losing the person scares you more than losing yourself. Think about that carefully. Some humans are so terrified of abandonment, they abandon themselves first. They stop speaking honestly, stop expressing pain, stop reacting naturally. Why? Because they fear being too much. So they shrink themselves emotionally to remain lovable, and that is one of the saddest things a person can do. I have seen people destroy their sleep trying to understand somebody who already stopped caring. Seen people stare at old messages at 3 a.m, searching for proof that the love was real. Seen people blame themselves for becoming difficult, when in reality, they were simply begging not to feel emotionally abandoned. And the dangerous part is that toxic situations rarely become toxic immediately. No. At first, everything feels beautiful. Warm conversations, deep attention, promises, comfort. That is why people get trapped, because they keep chasing the beginning. They keep hoping the person from the first months will return again. But sometimes the beginning was only a performance, a temporary mask. And accepting that can break the heart in ways words cannot explain. Especially when memories still feel alive inside you. You remember the calls, the laughter, the small details, the moments where they made you feel chosen. So your mind becomes divided. One half remembers the warmth, the other half suffers from the coldness they became. That inner conflict destroys people slowly, because emotionally, you are loving two different versions of the same person. One version exists in memory, the other exists in reality. And reality is usually the one hurting you. That is why walking away feels impossible sometimes. Not because you are weak, because the human brain becomes emotionally attached to familiarity, even painful familiarity. A broken relationship can still feel safer than loneliness. Isn't that terrifying? People will stay where they suffer simply because the suffering feels familiar. But eventually, there comes a moment where your body starts rejecting the pain your heart keeps tolerating. You lose appetite, lose focus, lose peace. Your chest feels heavy all the time. Your thoughts become obsessive. You reread conversations trying to locate the exact moment things changed. And sometimes there is no exact moment. Sometimes people slowly stop loving you while pretending everything is normal. That is the cruel part. No warning, no honesty, just emotional distance growing quietly between two people. And deep down, you can feel it. You can feel when affection becomes forced, when attention becomes obligation, when your presence no longer excites somebody the way it used to. Most people notice it early, but denial is powerful, because truth threatens attachment. So they keep holding on, long after the relationship starts poisoning their mental health, long after respect disappears, long after peace disappears, until one day they finally understand something life-changing. Love should not feel like constant anxiety. Love should not make you afraid to express pain. Love should not make you feel lonely every single night. And the moment that truth finally enters your soul completely, walking away stops feeling like weakness. It starts feeling like survival. And survival, real survival, sometimes looks very ugly emotionally. People think healing is beautiful. Peaceful music, deep quotes, quiet acceptance. No. Sometimes healing looks like crying in silence while forcing yourself not to text somebody who destroyed your peace. Sometimes healing looks like staring at your phone for an hour, typing messages, deleting them, typing again, then throwing the phone away because your dignity is fighting your attachment. That battle is brutal. Especially when the connection once felt real, because your mind keeps replaying the good moments like a desperate lawyer defending a guilty person. It reminds you of their smile, their attention, the nights they made you feel understood. And for a second, you almost forget the anxiety, forget the coldness, forget how many nights you cried trying to understand why love suddenly started feeling one-sided. That is why emotionally attached people return so many times. Not because they enjoy suffering, because memories can drug the human mind. You become addicted to emotional highs and lows. One cold day, one warm day, one ignored message, one sudden moment of affection. And your brain starts surviving on crumbs, tiny emotional crumbs. That is dangerous, because eventually you stop asking for healthy love. You start celebrating basic decency as if it is something extraordinary. A simple reply feels special. A little attention feels magical. A small apology feels enough to erase months of pain. And that is how people lose themselves quietly. Not all at once, little by little. You stop focusing on your goals, stop sleeping correctly, stop feeling emotionally stable. Your entire mood becomes dependent on somebody else's behavior. If they are warm, you feel alive. If they become distant, your entire day collapses. That is not peace. That is emotional captivity. And the terrifying part? Many people stay trapped there for years, because they fear starting over, fear loneliness, fear watching somebody they still love become a stranger forever. But listen carefully. Loneliness is painful, yes, but losing yourself completely is worse, much worse. At least loneliness leaves your identity intact. Toxic attachment slowly erases it. You become insecure, overthinking, emotionally exhausted. You start apologizing for things that are not even your fault. You become terrified of saying the wrong thing because deep down, you already feel replaceable. And no human being should live like that. No soul should constantly beg for reassurance from somebody who clearly enjoys emotional control. Because some people know exactly what they are doing. They notice your attachment, notice your patience, notice your fear of losing them, and instead of protecting your heart, they use your love as leverage. They disappear to test your reaction, become cold to see how much chasing you will do. Give the bare minimum because they know your loyalty will keep you there anyway. That is not confusion. That is manipulation. And eventually, you reach a point where your soul becomes tired of surviving emotionally on crumbs, tired of hoping, tired of overthinking, tired of carrying a connection that feels dead in your own hands. So one night, maybe very late, maybe while the room is silent and your chest feels heavy, you finally tell yourself the truth honestly. This pain is not love anymore. And that sentence changes everything. Because once the illusion breaks completely, your healing truly begins. Painfully, slowly, but honestly. And honest healing is cruel in the beginning. Because now there are no more lies protecting you, no more false hope, no more pretending the situation will magically return to what it was months ago. Now you must sit alone with reality, and reality can feel merciless. You wake up reaching for your phone automatically. You still expect their name to appear, still expect warmth, still expect effort. But silence answers you instead. And silence can scream louder than words sometimes. That is when withdrawal begins. Because emotional attachment behaves almost like addiction. People laugh when they hear that, but it is true. Your mind becomes chemically attached to attention, affection, reassurance, little emotional rewards. So when the connection disappears, your body reacts. Heavy chest, anxiety, restlessness, sleepless nights, obsessive thinking. Some people even feel physical pain. That is how deep emotional suffering can go. And during those nights, the temptation becomes dangerous. You want to text them, call them, beg for clarity, beg for one warm conversation to stop the emotional shaking inside your chest. But that is usually the exact moment where dignity matters most. Because pain makes humans irrational. Pain makes people return to places that destroyed them. A wounded heart does not always want what is healthy. It wants what feels familiar. That is why so many people reopen doors they prayed to escape from, for one tiny moment of relief. One message, one apology, one false promise. And sometimes, the toxic cycle starts all over again. Warmth, hope, attachment, distance, pain, confusion, silence. over and over until the soul becomes exhausted beyond words. You know what is truly heartbreaking? Watching a good person slowly lose their light trying to save a relationship alone. Watching them become anxious, insecure, emotionally unstable when they used to feel peaceful before meeting that person. That transformation is terrifying because unhealthy love changes personalities. A calm person becomes obsessive. A confident person becomes insecure. A joyful person becomes emotionally drained. And eventually, they stop recognizing themselves completely. They stare into mirrors, wondering where their old self disappeared to, wondering why they feel heavy all the time, wondering why happiness suddenly feels so far away. That is why walking away is sometimes an act of survival, not cruelty. You are not abandoning love. You are abandoning emotional destruction. There is a difference, a massive difference. Because healthy love should not constantly damage your nervous system. Healthy love should not make you afraid every single day, should not leave you crying at night while the other person sleeps peacefully. And one of the hardest truths to accept is this. Some people benefit from your suffering. Not openly, not consciously maybe, but they enjoy the control your attachment gives them. They enjoy knowing you will stay no matter how little they offer. That power feeds their ego. So when you finally pull away, when you finally stop chasing, stop begging, stop explaining, they become confused. Because for the first time, they feel your absence instead of your availability. And absence teaches lessons that conversations never could. Sometimes your silence explains everything your tears failed to explain. Because people often ignore your pain until your presence disappears with it. That is why self-respect is so important. Not arrogance, not pride, self-respect. The ability to say, I love you, but I will not destroy myself to keep you. That sentence alone can save a life emotionally, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. And the painful part about self-respect is that it often arrives late. After the damage, after the sleepless nights, after you already gave pieces of yourself to someone who handled your heart carelessly. Human beings are strange. Sometimes we only learn our value after watching somebody treat us like we had none. That realization changes people deeply. Because suddenly, you start remembering everything you ignored. Every disrespect disguised as a bad day. Every cold reply you excused. Every moment your intuition warned you, but your attachment begged you to stay blind. And intuition is terrifyingly honest. It notices emotional shifts before words do. You can feel when somebody stops choosing you emotionally. Feel when conversations lose warmth. Feel when effort becomes forced. Feel when affection becomes obligation instead of desire. Most people notice it early, but they panic. Because accepting the truth means risking loss. And humans fear loss more than suffering sometimes. That is why they stay. Even while the relationship slowly poisons their peace. You know what emotional exhaustion really is? It is grieving a connection while still inside it, still talking, still trying, still hoping. But deep down, already feeling the distance growing between both souls. That feeling is unbearable, because your body senses the ending before your mind accepts it. So you become anxious all the time, overanalyzing messages, replaying conversations, studying tones of voice like your survival depends on it. And in a way, emotionally, it does. Because attached people slowly build their emotional stability around another person's behavior. If the person is warm, they feel safe. If the person becomes distant, their entire nervous system collapses. That is dangerous. Very dangerous. No human being should give another person that much power over their mental state. But love, or what people call love, can make intelligent people tolerate unbelievable things. People forgive betrayal because they fear loneliness. Forgive neglect because they remember old memories. Forgive emotional abuse because they keep hoping the good version of the person will return. Hope can be beautiful, but misplaced hope destroys lives quietly. Especially when somebody keeps feeding you tiny moments of affection, just enough to stop you from leaving completely. A warm message after days of silence. A small apology after deep disrespect. A little attention after emotional starvation. And your heart, your exhausted heart, grabs those tiny moments like they are oxygen. That is how people become emotionally trapped. Not through chains, through inconsistency. One day cold, one day loving, one day distant, one day affectionate. And your mind becomes addicted to uncertainty, because uncertainty creates obsession. You start chasing emotional reassurance constantly, trying harder, loving harder, sacrificing more, thinking maybe if you become better, the pain will stop. But healthy love was never supposed to feel like emotional survival. Healthy love should not force you to abandon your dignity to keep somebody close. And eventually, after enough suffering, after enough nights where your chest feels heavy and your thoughts refuse to quiet down, something changes. You become tired, not angry, not hateful, tired. The kind of tired that reaches the soul itself. The kind that makes silence feel safer than another painful conversation. The kind that finally understands peace is more valuable than attachment. And that moment, that exact moment, is where healing truly begins. Quietly, slowly, painfully, but truthfully. You know something nobody tells emotionally attached people? Sometimes closure never comes. No perfect explanation, no honest apology, no deep, final conversation where everything suddenly makes sense. Sometimes people simply become colder, quieter, more distant. Until one day you realize you are mourning someone who is still alive. That kind of grief is complicated, because your heart keeps searching for the person you remember, while reality keeps showing you somebody completely different. And humans suffer terribly when memory and reality stop matching each other. You remember warmth, attention, care, the way they once looked at you. But now conversations feel empty, forced, like two strangers trying to imitate old intimacy. That realization can break even strong people quietly, especially the ones who truly loved deeply. Because deep people do not detach easily. No, they replay everything. Every word, every promise, every moment they felt emotionally safe. They sit awake wondering, was any of it real? And honestly, sometimes it was real for that moment. People can genuinely love you and still become unhealthy for you later. That is another painful truth. Not every ending requires hatred. Sometimes two people simply become emotionally destructive to each other. One keeps chasing, one keeps withdrawing, one keeps begging for reassurance, one keeps becoming colder. And eventually the relationship turns into emotional survival instead of love. You stop feeling calm around each other, stop feeling understood. Every interaction becomes tension, overthinking, fear, exhaustion. And still, people stay. Because humans confuse attachment with destiny all the time. Just because somebody affected your soul deeply does not mean they are meant to stay in your life forever. Some people arrive to teach lessons, painful lessons, lessons about boundaries, about self-worth, about what happens when you ignore your intuition for too long. You know what intuition usually sounds like? Not loud screaming. No, it sounds quiet, very quiet. Little feelings inside your chest saying, this does not feel right anymore. This person is changing. You are becoming unhappy. But attached hearts silence intuition because truth threatens hope. So they keep trying harder, calling more, explaining more, forgiving more, until they emotionally collapse from carrying something too heavy alone. And the saddest part? Sometimes the other person watches you collapse and still does not change. That is when reality finally enters the soul. Not everybody loves the way you love. Not everybody protects hearts carefully. Not everybody loses sleep after hurting somebody emotionally. Some people can watch you cry, then sleep peacefully an hour later. That truth hurts deeply when you are soft-hearted, because kind people expect others to feel guilt the same way they would. But emotionally detached people often move differently, colder, more selfishly, more comfortably. And once you understand that, you stop expecting your pain to magically awaken empathy inside everyone. You begin accepting something difficult. Closure is not always receiving answers. Sometimes closure is observing behavior repeatedly until the truth becomes impossible to deny. The late replies, the emotional distance, the inconsistency, the disrespect disguised as confusion, the way your anxiety increases every time you interact with them. Patterns reveal truth more honestly than words ever will. Anybody can say, I care. Anybody can promise forever. Anybody can sound loving when emotions are high. But behavior always exposes reality eventually. That is why emotionally mature people stop listening only to words. They watch consistency, effort, respect, presence. Because real care repeats itself naturally. It does not appear only when you are about to leave. There are people right now lying in bed beside someone they love and still feeling completely alone. That kind of loneliness is terrifying because it teaches you that physical presence means nothing when emotional presence disappears. A person can hold your hand and still make your soul feel abandoned. That is why emotional pain confuses people so deeply. There are no visible scars, no blood, no broken bones, but internally, Internally, the person is collapsing slowly. They stop feeling emotionally safe, and once safety disappears from love, everything changes. You begin overthinking simple things: tone of voice, reply speed, facial expressions, energy shifts. Your nervous system stays alert constantly, like your body already knows heartbreak is approaching before your mind accepts it. And the body notices truth very quickly, faster than excuses, faster than denial. That is why anxious people become exhausted all the time. Their minds never truly rest. Even during calm moments, they are waiting for emotional disappointment, waiting for distance, waiting for silence. And living like that changes a human being. You become emotionally defensive, hyper-aware, afraid of small changes, because your heart has already learned how quickly warmth can disappear. Some people become so emotionally drained, they start apologizing just to avoid conflict, even when they are hurt, even when they are right. Think about how tragic that is. A soul becoming smaller just to remain loved. That is not love. That is fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being replaced. Fear of watching somebody slowly detach while you still love them deeply. And honestly, few things hurt more than feeling somebody emotionally leave you little by little. Not suddenly, slowly. One cold reply at a time. One ignored emotion at a time. One silent night at a time. Until eventually, you stop recognizing the relationship completely. The conversations feel forced. The laughter sounds tired. The connection feels heavy instead of peaceful. And deep down, both people know something is dying, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Because endings scare humans, even painful endings, especially painful endings. People would rather suffer familiar pain than face uncertain loneliness. That is why so many stay trapped in emotionally unhealthy situations for years. Not because they are weak, because attachment is powerful. Memories are powerful. Hope is powerful. Hope can convince a person to ignore 1,000 red flags just to relive 3 beautiful memories. And sometimes those memories become emotional prisons. You keep revisiting them in your mind, trying to justify staying, trying to prove the connection still deserves your suffering. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. You notice your peace disappearing, your confidence fading, your joy becoming rare. You realize you are no longer living, only emotionally surviving. And survival mode is exhausting. Constant anxiety, constant overthinking, constant emotional monitoring. Your mind never stops. Even during sleep, your chest feels heavy. That is when the soul finally begins craving something more important than love. Peace. Real peace. The kind where your nervous system relaxes again. The kind where silence no longer hurts. The kind where you stop begging people to reassure your worth. Because mature healing teaches something very important. If somebody truly values your presence, you will not constantly feel confused about where you stand with them. Healthy love may face problems, misunderstandings, hard moments, but it does not leave you emotionally starving every day. And once a person understands that deeply, truly deeply, They stop romanticizing emotional suffering. Stop calling anxiety passion. Stop calling inconsistency complex love. Stop calling emotional neglect a rough phase. They finally see things clearly. And clarity changes everything. Because once your eyes open completely, your soul can never